So maybe Ludwig can send the link to the mailing list, and then people can help you to take notes.
Otherwise, you can find it on the meeting agenda.
Okay, yeah. And also remind you to sign the blue sheets. So firstly is the milestone check. Currently, we are done with the COSE message specification. And we have a milestone to submit constrained appropriate algorithm as a work item. So this one is still pending. So we will discuss two additional algorithm draft this time. And for the COSE message draft, we plan to submit to IESG for publication, I think, quite soon, because currently we are we have already finished the working group last call, so we are quite close to that milestone. And the only one left is about the algorithm draft. So we will discuss that in this meeting. Okay, so let's move to the COSE message draft. And Jim?
This is Hannes. On just a question on, I was wondering, like from a status point of view on the message document, when you did the working group last call, there weren't too many reviews. Everyone was fairly busy. I didn't do my review either because I was also busy, but I was actually at that time sort of looking around for implementations and working with some of the guys in ACE to look at implementation activities, and specifically for IoT devices, and things are still in a very early stage. So I wonder whether it's useful to push forward and finalize it, or sort of wait a little bit to get at least some implementation feedback. I know, Jim, you have an implementation, but it's written for high-end systems. Like some of the students I talked to, like who had looked at the code, they said like RAM allocations for 64 kilobytes and then these type of things. So, but I don't know what's your ambition level.
So how long do you expect to wait if we want to wait?
Well, I'm curious on like how are we doing implementation wise? Like I know that there was this the student from Ludwig from your group who had worked on implementation and shared that. But besides that, I'm not sure on any embedded implementation.
Quick comment on that. I indeed had two students work based on Jim's C code, and they made like a messy, dirty alpha, and to get done with their master thesis. And we have hired one of them who is going to turn this messy, dirty alpha into something usable now. So he will start in September. I am hoping to have something for IETF 97 in November. I'll keep you updated.
I don't know about someone else, but we definitely need some implementations on this, because otherwise, like that was one of the showstopper in the student project that I reported about in the ACE group, because there was obviously no COSE implementation available that they could use. They had to fall back to this and Jose stuff, and they used a JSON web token for that purpose. So, like, it's good to have specifications done, but it would be kind of cool if we actually have some implementation feedback as well.
So I noticed that in Jim's slides, so he will talk about the implementation status. So maybe we can just go to Jim's slides and then to see the status for the implementation, and then we decide the next step. Oh, okay.
Okay, so where the document is right now. It's officially completed the working group last call. in the process of getting the checkers write-up done, there have been several things noticed, most of which are minor things that nothing has actually affected the core specification of the document. Some of it is just IANA work, some of it is IANA, that quick. Some of it is IANA work, some of it is editorial type stuff. I expect to have a version of the document with all of those updates done by the time I get off the plane on the way back. So there should be a new version published next week. One of the questions that basically comes up at this point, Carson's not actually here. It might be useful for us to request IANA to do early allocation of the CBOR content types because those values show up through all of the implementations and they show up through all of the examples for the document. And the later we postpone that, the more likely those numbers are to potentially leak into the real world. And also, the more work it is going to be to actually do that upgrade at a later point. So it's quite possible that we should talk about trying to get an early set of allocations for that from that specific registry. We are defining a substantial number of registries in this document, and they're all set up for expert review. One of the requirements of the working group of the chairs, the document editors at some point is we need to nominate some candidates, designated experts for doing that expert review. If people have any suggestions beyond the usual suspects, I'd appreciate it if you would mail me, Kathleen, or the chairs to give us some ideas of people who might be good people to occupy that role. Next slide. So the current status. As Hannah said, I was trying to get quick and dirty implementations done. I was not actually worried about trying to do them in an IoT world. Part of that because, you know, I wanted to get things working. I wanted to make sure things were going to work before I worry about anything else. I mean, the first problem I have if I say I want to do an IoT implementation with this is I start asking the question and say, so do we have an IoT cryptographic library? The answer is not really. Of course. There's about half a dozen of them, and they come in different flavors, and none of them seem to be very general purpose useful. So if you've got one that I can use, please let me know.
Well, this is Hannes. So of course there are different libraries. Like there's not a single crypto library for on the desktop world or smartphone world either. So, but there are at least a few candidates that people can take a look at. So of course we have a preference for our library, which is part of the MPTLS code, which is a crypto library there, and I'm sure there are others as well. But they
so when I go into that, the first thing I run across is I can't remember if GCN is in or not. I know that the current poly stuff is wrong in terms of what we use for ADAD as opposed to what we use for TLS.
Sort of, yeah, the poly stuff is fairly new. The GCM support is there, but for the IoT side, we want to use CCM. That's what we yeah, that's what we would be use everywhere, like what we recommend to use, like in core and the dice profile, etc. Yeah, I would have to check the status on some of the newer things, but they are a little bit more experimental, definitely. Yeah.
But I mean,
but maybe there are other ideas what other libraries people want to use. So maybe you can create a shim on top of it to make that to hide some of the details of the specifics of the library. But that's at least Ludwig had been using the MPTLS library for that purpose in his code.
And I'd love to pull some of those in and include them. But when I asked, I was not really given any strong pointers as to what should be used.
Did you ask them this?
I think so.
Okay, failed to see that. So.
There is a source, as part of the GitHub projects up there, a whole slew of example of messages that are set up. They're all set up, of course, using the current content type encoding, which is going to change at some point in the future. I'm currently in the process of trying to get the new EDVSA algorithms to work on my implementation, so I can produce examples for those, and then the process checking the EDVSA document for CFRG. I've also got failing examples as well as successful examples, ideas of other examples that should go up there. I'd love to see them.
Sorry, could you check the microphone in? Just need to hear you at all. I mean,
Let's use that one.
See over there, just tap it and see if it's working at all.
no.
Okay, yeah, that sounds better. There are examples, any missing examples, things I should put up there that would be useful. Once we get a CWT spec, I think we should probably put some CWT examples up there. There may be other examples that we should put up there. I don't know whether it makes sense to do some examples that are wrapped in core as part of the processing or not, but anything from that is useful. I am planning to try to do some focusing for at least the next 3 meetings in the in the hackathon for both COSE and Jose work. So anybody who has other implementations, anyone who has applications that they think will want to use this, anyone who has specific environments they want to implement for, anything I can do to help on that, and do interop testing, help the development work, do some development work myself. Let me know what sorts of things people think would be useful, so we can do some focused work at the code sprint, at the hackathons, not the code sprint, on any of this stuff. I think that's it.
Yep. Okay, Mike.
Mike Jones, in response to Jim's hackathon comment, one of the things that I know Jose implementers have found extraordinarily useful is the example doc that Matt Miller did, which is 7520, that contains comprehensive machine readable examples of uses of every algorithm that's defined. I don't know if that's something that you're interested in doing in the scope of what you described, or if somebody else wants to take that on.
The question from my point of view is that more worthwhile having as a paper document, or more worthwhile as having potentially a paper document which describes how to use the GitHub repository in that way? Because the GitHub repository, if you look at it, basically has each example has this exact same set of information as what's in that paper in that paper RFC. So it's got, this is the input, this is the key, this is the CEK you're going to calculate, this is the key agreement you're going to calculate, this is what you're going to get out of the HKDF statement. So everything is in that example. So it's and that's a bit more machine readable than what is the paper.
Oh, completely agreed. I'm just thinking out loud. As part of my working group last call review, I didn't ask the question in my head, do the examples in the current messages doc cover all the algorithms? I think the answer is no.
No, they do not.
All right, we can continue this later, but that was my thinking for a hackathon project.
Okay, so my summary for the message draft is that we need more reviews because Hannah said there's some vacation time and people didn't look at that, and we don't have enough reviews. And also we need to get more examples and more implementations. So the next step is that Jim can get more reviews, and then we can add some examples, and then we submit for publication. Okay. Timeline.
I'll be honest. I mean, we can put out to the list to give more reviews, but I mean, basically, this document has been more or less fixed since the 1st of May, or middle of May, I think it was, is when the last time was. And when we said, essentially, you know, we're going to have 2 weeks of review, and then we're going to have 2 weeks of last call, and we've had 4 weeks since then. Do we really think that Hannes is going to manage to get me a review between now and 6 months from now? So I don't mean to pick on you particularly, Hannes.
No, you do. Like, look at the number of people who had posted working group last call comments. Like, this should be somewhat really important. So, like, we worked in ACE, we tried to reshuffle things around COSE. It's sort of the expectation that lots of people are going to use it because they were very concerned about the size limitation of the JSON payloads. And we had lots of interactions earlier on the document. So I spend my time more on like finding out on the implementation side because that was, and also ACE trying to put sort of the COSE into that context. Well, if you think it's fine, like, move ahead. I will provide my comments, or I will provide review comments if I have them in IETF last call. I can also do that. But I would also encourage others to look at this, because otherwise we may end up having that there's some things in there that we may or may not like.
Yeah, I mean, I've had 5 or 6 people that I've requested read the document.
Yeah. Like, for example, in OWASP, like, we publish things where there are tons of implementation. Before that, we don't move ahead. You know, like, you look at DLS, people do a lot of hacking, and now here somehow we are a little sort of relaxed. I don't know. I don't understand why exactly, but.
So it's from Justin. We had a 2-week pre-review and had a 2-week working group last call. We all have had time as a chair.
So Kathleen Moriarty, I think, you know, and Hannes agreed with this, you can review in IETF last call. A document can always get sent back to a previous stage. So if something comes up in IETF last call, even in IESG review, we can kick it back to the working group, right? So if something substantial comes up, it gets, those substantial comments go back to the working group for comment. Now, I would say, you know, we shouldn't start it for at least another week, given that a lot of people take next week off. Well, I guess maybe ADs who are exhausted take next week off.
Only ones with children.
I guess
I marked the day off, another week, but maybe we'll see.
Okay. So we will give more time for the people to review and then move it forward. Okay, and next one is additional algorithms. Okay, Jim.
Okay. There are some algorithms which are not in the base document. And some people have said, we want to add these algorithms because they're popular in some respect. The biggest 2 that come up, the biggest 3 that come up are RSA PSS, RSA OAP, and RSA v1.5. Of those, I would never be in favor of putting in 1.5 for all sorts of security reasons. I actually have a draft out there. That draft was basically produced by taking the full draft, cutting down sections that obviously had nothing to do with adding algorithms, and was never really designed to be a draft for people to read. It was more a draft of this is where I am on things that I pulled but don't want to lose. So it's got a whole slew of cruft in it. It's got, I believe it's still got the EDDSA stuff in it, which obviously has been pulled forward in the main document. It doesn't have any new things for doing key wraps, for doing key agreements, any of that sort of stuff. But there is some interest and potentially from people to include that and go forward. The other one that people have expressed an interest in is there's a couple places where people have asked us to potentially include hash algorithms as independent objects in the algorithm table so they can do some negotiations dealing with hash algorithms, or where they can do some specific interesting types of payloads so that they can do things like this is this file and this is the hash of the file. So in order to do, say, this is the hash of the file, you need to identify the hash. For that purpose, it might be useful to actually include hashes in the standard algorithm table, because then you could do either a hash or an HMAC or whatever, depending on what it is you're playing with. Next slide. If we do decide to include more algorithms, I'd like to actually try to figure out how to apply some criteria for selection of what we use and what we don't use. My understanding is COSE is still primarily focused at the IoT world. If there are people who are coming in to use COSE in a non-IoT world space, that may make some difference in how we do some selections. But right now, as you know, my primary idea is this is IoT, not internet. So one of the questions is, do we expect the IoT world to adopt these algorithms? I kind of have a hard time believing the IoT world is going to be all of that interested in doing RSA in general. I mean, they're taught, you're basically saying, if I go from the current NIST P256 curve to an RSA key of about the same security levels, you're adding almost 200 bytes to your message just for that additional bytes of signature. That's kind of, the IoT people were coming back and screaming, can we get rid of this 1 byte here? Can we get rid of these 2 bytes here? I don't think they're going to be all of that interested in saying, oh, hey, oh yeah, we can take that 192 bytes, no problem. So it's not clear that some of from that point of view, some of these are interesting. In terms of the v1.5 question, I mean, what sort of security analysis, what sort of proofs, what sort of implementations do we want on these things before we adopt them? I think we may actually want to be a little bit more rigorous about what we let into the world than we are in some cases where it's a bit more of a free-for-all. So yeah, so at this point it's like, if you can see next question, next slide, right? I have one more slide.
Yeah, you have one.
Okay. So at this point it's like there's a couple of different questions in my mind in terms of an additional algorithm document. The first is, do we want to wait a bit before we publish an additional algorithm document, just to give people some implementation experience, some real world experiments, so we can say, oh, well, we didn't miss just this one thing we should have missed. We missed these 3, 4, 5 things that we really should have talked about, because this is the sorts of things we're really looking at. mean, there is an EDHOC thing, which was discussed in ACE earlier. And it may be that that might actually be better cast as a 4-key Diffie-Hellman thing when you do the final key derivation step. I don't know whether it would or wouldn't, but in that case, that would, that's a larger algorithm change than something quite this simple as saying, oh, we need RSA. But that's the sort of thing we don't know until we get farther into looking at some of these algorithms, at these applications that people are going to use. There's also a couple of different approaches we could use with this document in terms of publishing it. We could actually keep the COSE working group open, let it go to sleep for 6 months, a year, and have a meeting and say, yes, we have things we want to do now. We could dump this work for additional algorithms into Kernel. We could basically say, you either need to recharter or you need to justify an independent submission or an individual submission to add these algorithms at a later date when we actually know what we're doing.
Yes, Renzo here. I have additional use case in which COSE is very useful for do key establishment algorithms, and I added some fields. I need nonces, go back and forward, and some other stuff. So in my use case, I use this, and I use several key establishment algorithms, nonce-based. But I'm okay if this goes like this. I don't know how later you can extend. I don't know. Maybe I should look at and send the comments. I use COSE to transport key establishment, to do a key establishment protocol. So the message transported from the different party use COSE, and I need nonces to be transported. I need some parts to be transported back, and etc. I know there is the AKA in COSE object that is very useful for my purpose, but not exactly, but it's similar to that.
Anytime you'd like to sit down and talk to me about that, I'd always be interested, simply just in terms of adding use cases. Adding stuff like that, adding things which go into the header parameters, adding new algorithms, is a relatively easy process in terms of you need to write a specification, you need to get it registered to Diana, and you need to have an expert. And part of the it goes in Diana is there will be a designated expert who will look at it and say, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. So adding these sorts of things at a later date is not really all that difficult.
From seeing Ronald, just an open question to participants. Jim mentioned that this work creates a large number of registries or sub-registries. Does anyone view that as a problem? Namely, requires too much management? Yes, it means the protocol has smaller encodings, but at least at the front end, an implementation needs big table to other identifiers by Jim.
Can't answer for other people. Personally, I'd say no. The management that's going to end up on this is fairly small.
So for the questions on this slide, so I want to ask that in the end, because we have another presentation from Mike. So I want to get feedback about this slide. So basically, we have several questions. So any feedback? No, I think the question is for discussion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question is for discussion. Yeah.
I mean, if anyone has comments relative to any of the questions I've got here, speak up now. It'd be really nice for us to have to give information into where we're headed.
This is Ludwig. Comment on the question from Sean. Actually, not every implementation will need all of the entries in the registry. So for the individual implementation, it won't be a problem. They will have a table with the few registry entries they need. I agree that managing the registry is going to be a bit more tricky, but then again, do we have a good alternative?
Carsten Bormann. COSE has been designed for the Internet of Things. Now, the question that comes up is, does that mean that all the exchanges that will be supported by COSE will be between constrained nodes? And for instance, in the current OAuth-based ACE architecture, we have less constrained clients and authorization servers that talk to each other, and they might be using RSA. They probably will be using certificates that contain RSA in them. I think it's important that we actually have a suite of algorithms we can use between constrained systems, but we may not want to switch to, we may not want to have to switch to a different representation just because this gives us a few additional algorithms that we don't have at the COSE level.
Mike Jones, Microsoft. One thing that we put into Jose, as you may remember, which I think was at Sean Turner's suggestion, was in the registry for algorithms, we included a field called algorithm analysis documents, which was a set of references to publications in well-known cryptographic conferences, national standards bodies, etc., providing the designated experts primary source material for cryptographic analysis of the proposed algorithms. And I realize, we have a stable document, but we could easily add that for COSE as well, as part of the criteria that the designated experts would use.
Yeah, I mean, adding that as part of the template I mean, that's actually not a column in. It's in the registration template. It's not actually in the IANA registry.
You may be right.
Okay, if there are no feedback, then we move to Mike's slides and then we come back.
I'm Mike Jones from Microsoft, and I'm here to talk for a moment about an individual submission draft on using the RSA algorithms with COSE. So the spec I wrote in the beginning of April defines how to use the standard RSA algorithms with COSE. In particular, RSA key type, PSS, OAP, and like the draft that Jim just described, this pulls text directly out of the COSE messages draft 05, which is the last one that still contained these algorithms. I think I'm about to answer your question. Next.
No, I probably said it loud enough.
We were wondering, like, you answered the question.
So the question is, why do both of these exist? And the history, from at least my point of view, was a quirk of timing. In issue 21, I volunteered to write the draft. In December, time passed. I went on vacation in March. Jim wrote a draft in March. I was good and stayed offline during vacation and didn't notice. And so one of the first things I did when I got back from vacation was I wrote a draft, which unsurprisingly, in fact, I did a diff of the two, a real line-by-line diff. And the stuff about the RSA algorithms is essentially the same because it came from the same source material. Next. So what is different? Mine has RSA, Jim also has EDDSA, although as he just pointed out, that's actually in the core messages draft again, so that would be deleted from Jim's anyway. So that only leaves one salient difference right now, which is that mine kept the numeric assignments for the different identifiers, and Jim's just says TBD right now. Kathleen?
Kathleen Moriarty. I'm wondering why you're going through it in this way, because Jim's draft is adopted, yours is not. So if you'd like to see, what was that?
Mine is not adopted.
Really?
No.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I was confused on that then.
I was writing a draft to fill a need because I thought Jim wasn't going to do it, but Jim did it. So I think we've got several good choices. I'll only be a couple more minutes.
Okay, and it's probably just how you're framing the questions. Mine, this, and as opposed to this draft does this, that draft does that.
Yeah, those were shorthands to make the lines short rather than draft Shad and draft Jones, etc. Next. Actually, given that EDDSA is in the main document now, which I didn't realize when I wrote these slides, we should just skip this. Next. So this is my last slide. We should clearly resolve the duplication. I think we've got two good paths that we could choose from. One is we could adopt Jim's draft and make decisions about whether to include additional algorithms or just to leave Jim's at the RSA algorithms and publish it soon. Or you could adopt the equivalent of my draft, and I don't care a lot whether I'm an editor, Jim's an editor, or Jim and I are co-editors, and get the RSA stuff out now. My preference for a moment wearing my Microsoft hat is that we do plan to use the RSA algorithms with COSE in some use cases, including some distributed ledger related stuff is a possibility, so not IoT stuff. We would like the RSA algorithm identifiers assigned, hopefully at the same time as the core COSE messages draft is adopted. And so in that sense, ignoring who's the editor, which I don't have a big stake in, I would like an RSA only algorithms draft done and adopted soon. I would be open to other algorithms being also put into that draft that are mature, that we're not going to block on the approval of another RFC in order to get the thing approved. I'm fine, obviously, with the working group deciding later to adopt other algorithms, possibly in Jim's draft. So at this point, it's chairs and Kathleen and the working group to figure out what we want to do. But I just want the RSA stuff done.
So Kathleen Moriarty, it's up to the working group, right? Does this happen in the working group? So the chairs will lead that. It's not up to me. I just want to know strongly that the working group is interested in doing this before we even worry about whose draft gets adopted, and take it from there. So I don't know, Kipeng, do you have any questions formulated to start to figure this out?
Yeah, so yeah. I plan to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So let me ask, how many people have read either one or both of the draft? 5. And how many people plan to implement that? Okay. Okay, 3.
Justin said that I see a number of questions. First, do we see a need for this work? Yes or no? Second, if yes, should it be in this working group?
Yes. So the first question is, do we see the need for this work? So I'm not sure if you have enough information. Do we need any discussion, or we just harm?
The people who raised their hand and said they were going to implement, are you guys all implementing the same problem, or are you implementing different problems?
There's only 5, may as well.
I don't entirely understand the question.
Are you implementing the exact same protocol that Microsoft is, or do you have a different one?
I don't know. We haven't discussed it.
So okay, so you're going to implement it, but you don't have. You're saying you're going to implement it, but you don't have an immediate need for it.
No, I'm saying that we haven't discussed whether or not our need is the same as their need.
Okay.
It could be, but it might not be.
So
the other people who raised their hand.
For the remote people, John Bradley said that Ping is not discussed with Microsoft whether their need for the algorithms is the same as Microsoft's need for the algorithms.
For the minutes, how many people raised their hand for implement?
3.
okay.
Tony Nadlin, Microsoft also, but we have different use cases within Microsoft. So Mike mentioned one particular use case. We also have an implementation for W3C, which is which will be the web authentication APIs that will use this particular pattern also. So
That's true. WebAuthn is using COSE signed messages, and RSA is one of the algorithm sets. So there's a W3C dependency on this. Yes, for some of the low-level message formats when talking to what FIDO calls authenticators. That's correct.
So I'd also like to know how many people are interested but don't have enough information yet and plan to read the drafts, right? So can we even take these polls now? Okay, so that's a few more people that are interested. So maybe there were 4 more. And I'm just saying a few because we don't have to be exact on numbers. All right, so this probably has to go to the list. We probably can't decide it now. I don't think there's enough information, and only 5 people are ready to make an opinion, and 4 more want to have an informed opinion. So maybe can we put a timeline on this from the chairs and then put it out to the list?
Okay.
Give it like a several-week poll. And you can formulate the questions now. You could try to ask it now, but then open it up to the list so that there's a lot of people that aren't ready to answer. Maybe there's some more, I hope.
Yeah.
Justin said that the chairs will take the question to the list in a week. The chairs will take the question to the list in a week. Let the poll run for 2 weeks from Justin.
Okay. Okay. But now I want to get some rough idea from the room. So do we see the need for this work? So if you are in favor of this work, please hum now. Okay. If you don't see the need for this work, please hum now. If you don't have enough information, please hum now. So, Hannes, I noticed that you hum for don't have enough information and don't see the need.
No, I didn't hum for the. So I hummed for the. I don't have enough information because I don't know what the other use cases are that people come for. But I haven't. So our use case for COSE is focused on the IoT case. So the RSA algorithms don't play their role there. But I'm going to ask inside the company to see whether there are some other use cases that people are envisioning, and so I want to check that in the same way as some of the other guys who raised their hands previously. So I was someone else hummed for the no need for the work.
Okay.
Hannes, quick question. The use case I talked about, is that not relevant for you? Or?
So in the that got me to think, but I believe even in the case where if we create the objects at the server side, at the authorization server, and then pass it on, they can be verified at the resource server side, which would be then an IoT device most likely, or ultimately at the authorization server. And there, if you have one algorithm, why would you want to pass larger objects around, even if they are not potentially not very
less constrained nodes?
Even if so explain me your scenario again.
Okay, so that an authorization server is able to actually issue a ticket, there needs to be some form of exchange. And that exchange is often based on things from the big web environment. So it has RSA certificates in it and so on. So there's lots of RSA going back and forth. Of course, you could stipulate that everything that uses RSA also must use ASN1 or whatever, but that complicates implementations. So it would be nice to also be able to use COSE for those exchanges.
Yeah, but for those exchanges, like in the with what we are defining the client, which would then be, for example, a mobile phone or a tablet or so, it wouldn't actually read those payloads to begin with, so it wouldn't have to deal with them.
Well, it will have to negotiate with the authorization server to actually issue anything. If it cannot convince the authorization server that something should be issued, then nothing will happen. And that will happen in terms of something that probably comes from the big web.
Yes, but it has nothing to do with this specific piece of work. So if you use RSA keys in DLS, I don't see how that relates to this work. So nothing bubbles up at this level, at the COSE level. Maybe I'm...
That depends on the exchanges. Yeah, go ahead.
So for example, in the OSCOA profile for ACE, we're speaking about what kind of communication security do you have between the client and the resource server, and what kind of security do you have between client and authorization server. Mm-hmm. And assuming that we're using application layer security in both cases, the client needs to communicate with the authorization server, and potentially RSA is a better algorithm if the client is not constrained. And then we're using COSE for this. So that would be an application.
So if I indeed implement that type of functionality, which would be somewhat different than ours is today, then I could as well like implement the constrained version right away. I wouldn't have to sort of then suddenly on the device implement two different mechanisms.
So that wouldn't be different from what OS is in any other respect than we are looking at the communication. We are changing the communication security protocols in ACE.
Yeah.
So it's still OS. Well, yeah, well, but that's different in ICE anyway.
Yeah, but not necessarily. So if what I would most likely envision, if you have a tablet or mobile phone, you use one of the existing libraries. I talk to the authorization server, and it may use HTTP and all this fancy stuff, and then it gets an access token, and that access token, instead of it being JSON encoded, it would now be CBOR encoded, but it would just be smaller, and it would be passed along to the, for example, to the IoT device, and that would be that it may be processed by the resource server locally, or it would be then bounced off using token introspection back to the backend. That's sort of my.
I think we should take this offline, but just final point from my side. I'm not speaking about the format of the access token.
But I do.
I'm pointing at an application where COSE is used, where you could have used for RSA, and that's when you have the communication security, application layer security between client and authorization server. So if you don't talk about that case, that's fine. Yeah, but that's an example where you could use. That case. But that's the OSCOA profile for ACE.
Let me.
So it's okay if you have that use case, but at least I don't see it for us at the moment.
I know that there's use cases. While IoT is important, and it's important to Microsoft, and we'll probably use elliptic curve algorithms in those cases. There's also some cases where COSE is going to be used in unconstrained environments, whether processor rich or bandwidth rich. But because you maybe only want to have one cryptographic format, you may choose the CBOR format to use everywhere and appropriate algorithms to use in different parts of it. And these places have RSA and may have RSA keys and may use them. Right, and I did this draft because we do have those use cases.
So from the harm, it's not clear. So we have slightly more support to say. So when I ask, do we see the need for this work, then there are more harm for the need to this work. But there are also some people say they don't see the need, and also they don't have enough information. So I think we need more discussion on this topic, and we are not ready for adoption yet. So that's my understanding. So we will make a poll in the mailing list to continue the discussion and then find out the use case and to decide if we need to take this work or not.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with this, we are done. Okay, thank you. IoT里面搞RSA